How's everybody doing? Good? Still alive? Are you there? You know. Who took me before this class? Who took any class with me before? Okay, not many. Who's taking a class with me now? I mean, not this one. I mean, cell bio. Okay, so we have a couple of people doing a double dosage today. Yeah. All right, so the story with the still alive, I'll tell you sometime when we get to the muscle function. Yeah.
Do you only post the lectures after you design?
Oh, okay, the lectures. When I post the lectures. Well, because we are a bit behind, I don't have the previous lectures posted, so I'm adjusting as we go along. So what I can do is I can open the previous lectures that I had, so you guys just can have an idea of what we're covering, and then I can do the adjusting as we hit the points.
We had a previous lecture 9.
Yeah. Okay, so I will open the lectures that I have from last year, and then I will adjust as we go along, because I always like to change my slides a little bit. I don't use always the same slides. I always try to get the point across that is, like, if the class before had a bit of trouble in some areas, I modify those areas to make it better, so I don't just copy and paste my slides from previous years. So, right, well, but I will open the PowerPoints so you guys can follow along, and then whatever I modify, then is updated version. Okay. All right, so here we go. The tissues, right? We're gonna just do a little cleanup on the connective tissue, and with a bit more of specifications, a little more details. And if we have time, we start on the skin. If not, then we leave the skin for next week. Okay. So what you should know about connective tissue? You should know about the 3 components that are important for definition of connective tissue. And what are those? And ground substance, yeah, cells and fibers and the mush, the ground substance, the fibers and the ground substance will making the matrix. All right. And you also have to give examples of resident cells that are sitting there. Yeah. Oh, what happened to the exams? Yeah, I almost forgot about that. There was a mistake in the scanning of the scantrons. So when I received the results on Monday, the average grade was like 18%. So I nearly had a heart attack thinking, what happened to my students? And then I realized that something was really wrong. So I went, yesterday to the scanning place, and they shifted the keys. Thank goodness. So they put key B for exam A, and then key A for exam B, and everybody failed. And I'm like, okay, let's scan it again. So they're scanning it again. They promised me they'll have the results by today. So hopefully everybody did a lot better than 18%. Or I'll quit. Okay, yeah.
Say C on the test. Is it possible to make it up?
Okay, what happens if you did really badly on the first exam? That's the question. You always have the choice of taking the cumulative final. Because remember, you need only 4 exams. You need grades of 4 exams, right? So if you totally bombed the first exam, plan on taking the cumulative final, okay? Because then you can drop your lowest grade. Okay, you drop 1 lowest grade. I actually had a student last term that came to me saying that she did really well in the cumulative final. Why were not all of her other tests dropped? That's not how it goes. Okay, you drop 1 lowest grade, that's it. Okay, so plan on taking the cumulative final. All right, then it's open for everybody. If you miss 1 exam and you don't have a good excuse, take the cumulative final. Okay? If you miss an exam and you have a good skills, you make up the exam. Okay. Everybody's cool with that? All right. Okay, so now we're going to emphasize, those resident cells, and then we're going to look at some wandering cells. When you see something that says wandering cells, you should think immune system cells. Those are the ones that go around looking for trouble, or they go around to fix some kind of injury, because they're also very important for tissue regeneration. Okay, you have to know, absolutely have to know the 3 types of protein fibers that you're going to encounter in connective tissue. And then you're going to also see types of molecules that you find in the mush, in the ground substance. Okay? So what are the 3 things that are making those connective tissues? You have cells, fibers, and ground substance. And the ground substance and the fibers with the proteins, right, are going to make up your extracellular matrix. The one exception is in blood, that you do not have fibers, right, hopefully. Okay. So cells, you have resident cells, and you have those wandering cells. Okay. What are the resident cells? They live there. They don't move away from a particular connective tissue. They are housed in their specific connective tissue. They are going to produce the fibers that make up the tissue, and they're also going to produce the extracellular matrix. Okay, so the ground substance is also produced by those cells. So you have here fibroblasts. So those guys are really, really important at making the fibers. So here you have microscope image of what fibroblasts look like. And it's really cool that if you have worked with cells in the lab, you know that it's actually quite easy to culture those fibroblasts. They adhere to the plastic really well. They form this nice layer on the growing plate. So it's actually easy to work with them. Okay, so they look flat, right? They look kind of like a fried egg. And they really you have a lot of them in connective tissue proper. Okay. All right. Other types of cells that are resident are your adipocyte. So those are your fat cells. A lot of times they are a lot more resident than you wish they would be. Like you can't get rid of them ever. Unless you go through liposuction or some type of surgical procedure, right? So basically, by the time you're, I think about 5 or 8 years old, you have all the fat cells that you're going to have like for the rest of your life, and they can, either grow or shrink, but they usually don't divide. So, and usually they don't die like ever. I try to kill them, but they just stay. They stick to you like crazy glue forever. Anyway, those are resident cells. You know what I mean? Maybe. Okay, yeah.
Don't have them anymore?
They don't have the. Okay, the question was, if you take those fat cells out of a child, like 8, 10 years old, and they're not going to have those cells? No, they're not going to have those cells. The cells are not going to, regenerate. But the other fat cells, they're close to those cells. Those can swell to nearly, indefinite size. They get bigger. So it's not like you're always going to be skinny for the rest of your life. The other fat cells are going to take up the function. Yeah. That's why people who have liposuction and gain weight, it's like they didn't have any procedure done, because, the other cells kind of, take over. And that's the other interesting thing about fat cells too, because some people decide to do refurbishing or replacements or shifting from here, pasting it there, kind of surgery, right? So you have some people that take out from like the back, and they want to have like breast reconstruction or augmentation, and they put in the breasts. And when the cells adhere, when they take to the new place, they stay there. So I would say it's better than silicone. At least the cells from your body, and they're going to stay there. If you get vascularization, then they is like a the transplant that is autologous type of transplant. So it's your own tissue, you're not going to have rejection. You might have a lot of inflammation and necrosis, but not rejection. Okay. So there's a lot of interesting things about fat, I tell you. Okay, so those are your fat cells. Okay. All right, so more resident cells. You have those mesenchymal stem cells. What does that mean? Now my pen is not working. Okay, so this guy, mesenchymal stem cells. So they hang around, so this is a mesenchymal stem cell, and they're going to be activated when you have some kind of tissue damage, and those cells will replenish the ones that died, okay? But I just said with fat cells, it's a bit different, right? So this is in general, connective tissue in general. So this is your stem-like cell. When it divides, it's going to one of the daughter cells. Okay, so let's see here. This guy divides, so here is one cell, and here is another cell, two daughter cells. One of the daughter cells, the one that is orange over here, differentiates to replace the cell in the tissue that was damaged. The other one stays mesenchymal stem cell to make sure that you have a supply of these stem-like cells in case you need them again to reconstitute the tissue. Okay, so those are also considered resident cells. Okay, and then you have these guys here that are fixed macrophages. They are immune cells, and they sit in the tissue and they just stay there. They don't like to be wandering around like other cells of the immune system. So they are actually quite easy to be identified. They are big and they like to eat stuff, or meaning phagocytize. Okay. They eat things that get to the connective tissue, like bacteria or viruses. And they also clean up dead cells and debris. So they are very good for cleaning up the area in case you had some kind of trauma or necrosis. Okay. And when you have some tissue damage, these cells can also cause inflammation. Okay, so they're very good at producing cytokines that stimulate other immune system cells to get to that place to start tissue repair. All right, so those were your resident cells. And then you have here your wandering cells. So this would be really your immune system cells. And as you know, you have a lot of fibers that are running along this connective tissue. So those immune system cells, they like to use those fibers like train tracks and go from one place to another. And they travel all over the body using those connective tissue tracks. And we're going to have a better idea now, a better picture of what these tracks look like and what they're connecting in the body. Okay. All right, so we talk about the mesenchymal cells, right? And here, all right, the other types of immune system cells that we have the macrophages. I already talked about the fixed one. And then you have the wandering macrophages as well. So those go around and they move from tissue to tissue, and they're looking for either dead cells or debris or pathogens, right? So they like to clean up things. Besides the macrophages, those are the big ones, you have the smaller ones, they're called microphages. They do basically the same job as the macrophages, they're just smaller, so they can eat less. All right. Then you have these other guys, the lymphocytes. Okay, so lymphocytes are B cells and T cells. They're also natural killer cells. Okay, so B cells and T cells are part of your adaptive immune system. Natural killer cell is part of your innate immune system. You're born with it. Okay. All right, B cells become plasma cells, and those are the cells that are going to produce antibodies. So B cells will make antibodies. Okay. So besides those blood cells, you also have mast cells. Okay, that's also a type of white blood cell, but that is very much involved with inflammation and allergic reactions. So those mast cells, they produce histamine, and we're going to learn more about effects of histamine when we look at blood vessels. Okay, so basically histamine is going to make your blood vessels leaky, is going to dilate and make your blood vessels leaky, because histamine is produced at a site that either got damaged or is infected. So you need some form of inflammation to take place. Okay, so besides doing that to the blood vessels, histamine is going to make you itch. It's going to cause allergies, right? I mentioned before that certain first-generation drugs that are antihistamine drugs are used for allergies, right? And besides blocking histamine, they also make you very, very sleepy. So histamine is also a excitatory neurotransmitter, okay? So when you dampen down the effects of histamine, you are going to start falling asleep, right? Like Benadryl, those types of first-generation antihistamine or anti-allergic drugs. Okay. So the types of fibers, remember those three fibers. You have collagen, you have those reticular fibers. They're also made of collagen, but they're thinner. And then you have the elastic fibers. They're basically made up of elastin. So this should say elastic fibers, not elastin. So elastic fibers. No. We have seen those before. One important thing, I'm not sure if I mentioned before, is here these reticular fibers. They're very important in making the stroma of certain organs. Okay? So the stroma is like the covering or the shell that protects the organ, okay? And besides that part, besides the covering, the stroma can also go protrude through the organ. Yes?
I missed that. What did you say should be elastic?
Oh, here it says elastin. It should say here elastic. Is made of elastin, mainly made up of elastin proteins. Elastin is the name of the protein. The fiber is elastic fiber. There. So now it looks like the others. Okay. So when you look at this stroma part of organs, you see here, for example, the outside of a lymph node. Okay. And when you look inside of the lymph node, you see some protrusions of that outer casing, and those things that are dividing, they are also made up of these reticular fibers. Okay, so stroma is the part that is structural in the organ. When you look at the part that is functional, like the inside here, the functional part of the organ, that is called mesenchyma. Okay, so you have stroma and you have the other part. Stroma is the structural part. So ground substance, you have different types of ground substance, and you have stuff in there, but not cells. All right. So molecular stuff, but you do not have cells in there. And this stuff is made up by those cells that are resident cells. Okay, what kind of ground substance you have? You have some ground substance that is really viscous or liquidy, like in the blood. And then you have semi-solid. You're going to find that in cartilage. And then you have solid, like, for example, in the bones. So different types of ground substance. And then ground substance with the fibers, that's what's going to make your matrix. So we have seen that before. Okay. So here's a picture again of your tissue, connective tissue proper. Okay. And this is areolar connective tissue. and you're going to identify it by looking at the type of resident cells and the type of wandering cells and the type of fibers. So you're seeing here 3 different types of fibers, okay? You're seeing here fibroblasts, that's the cell here connected to the fibers, okay? What else you seeing? You're seeing here mast cell, so you're seeing different immune system cells. So these guys here are all immune system cells. This is a macrophage, and this here is a lymphocyte, either a B or a T cell. This is another blood cell, neutrophil, mast cell. This guy here, mast cell, you identify because it has a lot of vesicles. It's ready to dump histamine in a place, okay? What else you're gonna find in areolar tissue? You're gonna find some fat cells that stay there. And importantly, you're going to find blood vessels. Okay, remember, you have blood vessels in connective tissue. Okay. Type of fibers. Here you have the thick ones are the collagen fibers. You have the not so thick ones that are your elastic fibers. And you have the thin ones. Those are your reticular fibers. Okay. So we looked at that. And again, a review here of your loose connective tissue, and that's the packing material in the body, right? You got the areolar, we just looked at. We just mentioned also adipose tissue, and you also have the reticular type of tissue. Okay, we'll just look at areolar tissue. Okay, again, where are you going to find this type of tissue? Right under the skin. When you get to the skin, you're going to think about this papillary layer of the skin. So papillary layer of the dermis, okay? Subcutaneous layers, and then you're also going to find this type of tissue around organs. Not only around organs, but also around nerves and around muscles, around blood vessels. So this areolar tissue is like everywhere in the body. Remember, that's the tissue that gets swollen in case you have some kind of injury. Right, you get a lot of liquid that can be deposited in there. Okay. So here a bit of a review also on your adipose tissue. You have 2 types of fats. You have the white fat, that's the one that we're more familiar with, and that's going to store energy and serve also as an insulator and a shock absorbent. And you have the brown fat. And here it says it's found in newborn. And basically it's like behind the neck and is good for generating heat and keeping the body temperature of the newborn. And it says here we lose that fat as we age. That is not 100% accurate. It really depends on the environment where you live. I'm pretty sure we living here in South Florida lost all the brown fat that we could possibly have, right? Because it's hot. We are always like burning up in the sun, right? It's so hot in Florida. But if you live in places like Antarctica or New York or somewhere that's like not compatible with life, basically, right? That's why everybody moves to Florida, right? You actually have some brown fat. And there are some people who actually go through this, cold shock type of therapy to stimulate production of brown fat. You know what I'm talking about? Have you heard of these people that just jump in like a cold pool, or the bear club, what do you call them? The polar bear club, something like that? Yeah, as soon as they get the first frost, the first snow, they run to the beach and they jump in the water. To me, that is torture. I would just, let go of the brown fat. I mean, we always have, we can use a sweater, right? But usually brown fat, they say, is a bit healthier than the white fat. But anyway, if you like to torture yourself, but anyway, so problems with fat. Here I put this slide because this is a very, very common problem. It's called lipedema. Anybody heard of lipedema? Yes, 2 people, 3 people. Anybody else heard? No, okay. So what is lipedema? It's a disease of fat tissue and other connective tissue. It's not only fat tissue. Not a lot of people know about it. Okay, so a lot of people just say, it's fat, go lose weight. Oh yeah, but how can it just be fat? Well, lipedema tends to accumulate from the waist down. And most people affected by lipedema are women. And Even last time I looked at the statistics, about 10% of women are affected at some level of lipedema. This is when the fat becomes, they get into this disease state, and it doesn't matter what you do, you don't lose that fat. The fat cells will not shrink if they're involved in lipedema disease. So what happens usually when you look at the person is like the person has two bodies, skinny upper body and fat lower body. And it's kind of frustrating, if you know what I mean. If you're in the 10% like me who has lipedema, you probably tried everything to try to get rid of the fat, and what happens? You lose fat everywhere else, but the legs and the buttocks and the lower part of the body, they just stick to you. And I tell you, there was one point that I was just starving trying to get rid of this fat and exercising. I ended up with anemia. Why? Because the fat, it will hoard the nutrients out of your bloodstream, and the fat will keep on growing, and the rest of you is starving. That is unfair. Totally unfair. And then some people tell you, just lose weight. Yeah, who is telling you? Those people who can eat a mountain of food all the time and they're like this, skinny. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so you know maybe you know what I'm talking about. If you have lipedema, don't feel bad about it. Yes, there are certain things that you can do to minimize the pain. Oh, that's the other thing. It's painful. It hurts. Your legs hurt. I thought it was normal. I thought everybody's legs hurt because my legs have been hurting forever. It's not normal. And then one time I'm sitting with some friends and they got up and I get up and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, what's wrong with you? It's like, doesn't it happen to everybody? It's like, no. Like, really? Anyway, lipedema, yay. Okay. Another thing that is very common with lipedema, you bruise very easily. You just bump into something, there it seems like you got punched in the leg or something. Yeah, easy bruising. And those cellulitis and dimples. This is like stage 2 going to stage 3 type of lipedema, but it doesn't look pretty. You know, some people just would like to have pretty legs, but oh well, what you do? What I say is like, okay, they work, I'm happy. So you move on. But be aware of lipedema, because when some people tell you that they can't lose weight on the legs, don't think it's like they're not trying hard enough. If it's lipedema, they can try as much as they want. And another thing that is very depressing about this, it never goes away. As you get older, it gets worse. But there are some treatments nowadays. There are some doctors who are specializing in treatment for lipedema. Of course, insurance companies are not going to cover it yet, so it's expensive. Anyway, but there is hope. What else you find in lipedema? A lot of spider veins, varicose veins, and those hurt as well. Okay. All right, so a little picture here again talking about your reticular connective tissue, and is the shell and is made up of those reticular fibers. Okay, so looking at the dense connective tissue, just a quick review here. Mainly you're going to find a lot of collagen and not as much ground substance, because you have to have the fibers very much packed together. Okay, and here collagen is really the fiber that predominates. What kind of dense connective tissue you're going to have? You can have regular, irregular, or elastic. Okay, so you need to identify what those are. Dense regular, they're going to be all lined up in parallel. Okay, where you're going to find those? You're going to find them in tendons and ligaments. All right, so tendons are going to connect muscle to bone, ligaments are going to connect bone to bone, and if you look over here, you're going to find very little ground substance. You're just going to find fibers and then cells that are going to be placed here and there. Now, dense irregular, you're going to see also very little connective tissue, a lot of fibers that are packed, but they're not very much in parallel. They're kind of messy. And you're going to find it in places where you need to have a lot of resistance in all dimensions. Like, for example, right under the skin, right? You need to adhere the the dermis to the connective tissue, so you're going to need to have a layer of this dense irregular connective tissue. And also when you look at joint capsules, also, you can imagine if you put a lot of pressure in the big joints, especially synovial joints, you're going to have this dense irregular tissue because you have to absorb this pressure from all directions and distribute the pressure to all directions. Okay, so here is the other tissue that you have is elastic connective tissue, and where you're going to find it, basically large arteries, because you can imagine when you have this large artery, especially coming out from your heart, like your aorta, you're going to have a lot of pressure, a lot of blood pressure that is pushing through the artery. So the artery has to expand a little bit, it has to hold all the tension, and then it has to go back in the proper shape to keep on pushing this blood to the rest of the body. So that tissue is made up of these elastic fibers. Also, in your trachea, you're going to have these types of elastic fibers, and as well as you can imagine your vocal cords that you can expand, you can stretch and contract your vocal cords to produce all sorts of sounds, the deep sounds, and you can do the exercise and contracting and expanding your vocal cords. So that's thanks to your elastic fibers that are present there. Okay, and this is the one that I didn't have before, the fascia. Okay, fascia is really, really cool. So what makes up the connective tissue in fascia? You have loose connective tissue and you have dense connective tissue. Then it depends where in the fascia you're talking about. So you can think of the fascia as a whole body suit. It's a covering, it's inside your whole body, and it connects all different parts in the body. You can see this representation of fascia connecting your feet all the way here to your neck. Then you look in the back, and it's like all the way to the top of your head, and it goes all around in the back of your feet. This is like huge connection of fibers. And look sideways, it's like the whole body has this inner body suit. And it's not only up and down, it goes across. Look at this, across, this way, that way. And it goes everywhere. You're going to have this fascia. Okay. Now, when you think of fascia, you can think of inflammation of the fascia somewhere. Like, for example, plantar fasciitis. Anybody heard of plantar fasciitis? Yeah, anybody had plantar fasciitis? It hurts, especially in the morning. You come out of bed and you go put your foot in the floor and it's like, oh my God, this is torture. It hurts a lot. And then what do you do for plantar fasciitis? Why does it hurt in the first place? Well, it's in the bottom of the foot, but when you're normally walking, it shouldn't be hurting. It hurts because it's inflamed. You get inflammation. Those white blood cells that migrate through these tracts and go over there, got a little, trouble, too much usage. Maybe you never walked before and you go walk for 30 miles and then you get inflammation on the bottom of your feet. You can end up with some kind of plantar fasciitis. Maybe don't wear proper shoes or something like that, right? So what do? Well, you stop the inflammation. Usually you have these shots of anti-inflammatory drugs, mainly cortisol, hydrocortisone, corticosteroids. And I tell you, those hurt. I don't know which one is worse. And the size of the needle that they put right under your foot to reach the plantar fasciitis, oh my God, I didn't even know there was so much space between the sole of the foot and the bone. Like the needle is like this big and yeah, torture. But then after a while, you kind of get over the inflammation and you recover. It's like usually it's not a big problem. But yeah, plantar fasciitis is inflammation of the fascia. And one interesting thing about fascia is very much related to Oriental medical practices. Anybody heard of acupuncture? Yeah. Does it work? Yeah, you go to a good acupuncturist and it's amazing. They put a needle in your back and then your legs feeling better. It's like, what in the world? You know, they put a needle in the head and then your stomach feels better. It's like, how? It's not magic. It has to do with this fascia that is interconnected. Okay, so those therapists, they go through a lot of studying to know where to stimulate some portions of this fascia to have effects in other parts of the body, which is really cool. There are some acupuncturists that they were treating excessive compulsive eating by putting needles in the ears. I'm like, what does the ear have to do with the stomach? But then when you start looking at fascia, I'm like, oh, maybe there is some connection. Okay. Because they work somehow. All right, so here is the talk on the fascia. So usually the superficial fascia, the one closer to the skin, is made up of loose connective tissue. But then as you go deeper, then it gets to be more dense connective tissue. And look at this. The fascia is really responsible for like a third of the body biomechanics. So that's quite impressive. So usually you tend to think about muscles and bones, but you really have to think about fascia. And this is also why it's so important to stretch and to do elongation exercises before you start to exercise, to warm up the fascia so you don't end up with some type of inflammation or some type of fasciitis. Okay. All right, so here we talked also before about cartilage, and this part of the supporting connective tissue, and you have two types, okay, bone and cartilage. Cartilage, you have to know you have three types of cartilage. Then again, after you go through the skin, we're going to go into a lot more detail how the cartilage is made, what are the cells that migrate to where and start doing what to get the cartilage going, okay? Right now, you have to know the three types of cartilage. You have to know the elastic cartilage, the hyaline cartilage, and the fiber cartilage. You have to know where you find those and what kind of consistency they have. Elastic is the very soft one. Hyaline is the typical cartilage. And then the typical cartilage meaning in joints. And then the fiber cartilage is really the weight-bearing type of cartilage that you're going to find in three specific places. Right? It's going to be in the vertebra and the pubis symphysis, and oh, I forgot the third one. It's going to come up. Okay. Okay, so types of cells that you're going to find in the cartilage. You're going to find two types of cells. The chondroblasts are not here because I forgot to put them there, but those are the first one that start to make the cartilage. Then the chondrocytes are the mature cells, the resident cells. They're going to sit in little places inside the cartilage, and those are little lakes. You call them lacuna. Okay, so that's the little places where the cells, resident cells, will sit. And let me see here. Of course, cartilage is a lot more flexible than bone tissue, right? Okay. This is an important thing about cartilage. It does not have blood vessels. It's very much avascular. Most of the cartilage is avascular. Okay. So here, elastic cartilage, where you're going to find it? You're going to find it in sternal ear, also in the tip of your nose, and the epiglottis. Where is the epiglottis? In your throat. That's the little flap that covers when you swallow something. And you know it's very flexible. When you swallow, you can kind of feel going, that's the epiglottis. Okay? It will cover the trachea so that the food will go to your esophagus and you not choke. And sometimes it doesn't work very well. That's when you choke. All right, so that's the epiglottis. Okay. All right. Hyaline cartilage. After the soft cartilage, you have the hyaline cartilage right in the back of your nose, also in the trachea, and also larynx. That's your vocal, where houses the vocal cords. Here's showing a costal cartilage in your ribs. That's going to be your hyaline cartilage. And articulation of your joints, okay, and long bones. okay, and know what your hyaline cartilage looks like. You have little pairs of cells that like to hang around. There is a reason for that. Again, here your fibrocartilage, intervertebral discs, pubic symphysis, and, oh yeah, meniscus, menisci of your knee joint. That's the third place where you're going to find this fibrocartilage. Okay, so this really intended to bear weight. All right, so finally, here comes your first question. And the question says, of the following connective tissues, which generally takes the most time to recover from injury? So here you have to think. Okay. Which one is the tissue that doesn't have blood vessels? That in order to recover from injury, you need cells to get there. You need nourishment. Did this thing stop already? Oh, okay, so I guess it's counting down. What is your answer? Is B, cartilage. Cartilage does not have blood vessels for most part. Some people answer A, bone. No, bone recovers, and you do have a lot of blood vessels in the bones. So the bones will recover eventually. But when you damage cartilage or tendons, and tendons are not here, but that will be even like worse, right, to try to recover. Okay. All right, so we look at cartilage. Quickly about the bone, right? So we are going to get into a lot more details on formation of bones and different types of bones. The one distinguishing factor in bone matrix is presence of calcium salts. Okay, so when you see calcium salts, you think bone. Okay. Are there other tissues that can have calcium salts? Yes, but then it will not be like a normal type of tissue. There will be like disease tissue. You can get calcification in places, but because of injury or some other type of insult. But when you look at bone, that has deposits of calcium. Okay. The bone cells that are resident, those are called the osteocytes. Okay, osteocytes sit there, and those are the mature cells. The ones that start making the bone, that's going to be the osteoblast. Remember, blast the beginning, and osteocyte is the mature one. They also like to live in little lakes, just like the cells in the cartilage, and you call the lakes the same thing. You call them lacuna. So they live inside little lacunas. And you have two main types of bones. You either have compact bone or you have spongy bone. Okay, so all bones in the body, they're going to have usually some degree of compact bone and spongy bone. But then you're going to have to differentiate what looks like spongy, what is like compact bone. Okay, so here is showing a typical cross-section of a long bone. So that is a compact bone. Okay. So this is like a cross section. What you're going to find, you have a lot of central canals, and you have this type of unit that makes up this composition of the bone. So what you're going to have here is mainly like little straws that are put together with a central canal, and you're going to have these layers that look like onion peels, and you call them lamella. Okay, so layers, they are lamella, and in the layers, between the layers, you're going to have those little lakes that you call the lacuna. Inside the lacuna is where you're going to find your resident cells. Okay, and inside the central canal, you're going to have blood vessels and nerves that will go through. Okay, as we're going to see later with the bones. Also, this lacuna, they have communication with each other. They have little channels, and the cells get to communicate with each other, even if they are in apparent isolation. Like you see, like the cell is here, like this cell is not communicating. No, it is actually communicating. They have little spaces that they can talk to each other. That's a cool ringtone. All right. So here is your compact bone. You have those little canals, and they have nerves, and they have blood vessels. The name of those straws that make up your compact long bone, those are called osteons. Okay, so osteon is your little straw that goes along your compact bone. Okay. So what you're going to find is concentric rings of this matrix that is going to go around this central canal. So this whole thing here is going to be the osteon and central canal and rings that go around them. So those are the lamella. Okay. And okay, so this is your compact bone, and then you also have your spongy bone, that their structure is similar, but they do not have these osteons, these long osteons. They tend to look like sponges. So they are going to have a lot of holes and spaces that is filled up with blood or with marrow. Okay, and that is important because the compact bone or the spongy bone has to be very solid. It has to be very lightweight. Okay, so if it would be totally filled like the compact bone, it would be very, very heavy. Okay, so here a brief look at the fluids, and we know we have the blood and the lymph, as I mentioned that before. And here a little review of the lymph for you. One of the four main classes of connective tissue, or of the four main classes, which has the least solid ground substance. Oh, so we're looking for solid ground substance, and that should be quite easy. We should take 2 seconds in answering that. Least amount of solid ground substance. Okay, 10 seconds. Three, two, one. What is your answer? Blood. Blood is liquid. It's not going to have solid ground substance. Okay. So quick review of your muscle tissue. You know we have 3 types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. And your skeletal tissue is the one that is voluntary. You can control them. Remember, those are multinucleated fibers, and you're going to have those striations. And meaning you can contract them, you can control how they contract. That means it's under somatic nervous system or voluntary type of control. Okay. All right, so here is a picture of your skeletal muscle. You do have those striations, and you have fibers that are multinucleated. And notice how those fibers are pretty much parallel to each other. In comparison to your cardiac muscle, those also are striated, but they're not totally parallel to each other. They form little branches, and you tend to have on either one nucleus or 2 nuclei per cell. So it's not like multinucleated, either 1 or 2 nuclei per cell. And they tend to be branched, and also they are involuntary. They are not voluntary muscles. Cardiac muscle is not voluntary. Okay. So here you look at smooth muscle. You do not see striations. Okay, it's very much involuntary. And where you're going to find them in your guts. Okay, so visceral. And how you're going to identify the cell? They look like little football. They're called spindle-shaped. They have 1 nucleus per cell, and they are under involuntary control. And a lot of times they will just fire on their own. So it's really cool, the smooth muscle cells, as we're going to see later. Okay, Another little review here on your nervous tissue. You have two main types of nervous tissue. You're going to have the nervous cells, you have neurons, and you have glial cells. So the neurons are really important for receiving and processing information, transmitting information, right? As we have seen before, this typical type of neuron. You do have other shapes of neurons and other types of neurons, but this is like a prototype neuron. Besides neurons, you have also glial cells. So those are very, very important for support and for the immune system of the central nervous system. Okay, they will nourish the neurons, and they're going to protect them. They're going to support them, and they also work in immune system in the brain. Okay. So here we have seen that before. What the neuron looks like. You have your cell body. Close to the body, you have dendrites. You have one nucleus. Then you have this long thing that is the axon. When the axon is coated with these rolling cells, those are called Schwann cells. So you say this axon is myelinated. Okay, so it has myelin sheath around the axon. And let me see what else here. And of course, that's the very important cell for transmission of nervous impulses. Okay. All right, so now we get to the part we did not mention before. Covering and lining membranes. So more on these membranes. Okay, so what do you have to know about the membranes? You have to know the structure and function of those different types of membranes. You're going to have mainly three types of membranes. You have cutaneous membrane, so that's another name for your skin. Then you have mucous membranes, and then you're going to have these serous membranes. Let's see where they are and how you're going to recognize them. All right. So at last, in this chapter, you're going to look at tissue repair. That also involves inflammation. So you're going to have two types of tissue repair. So one of them is reconstituting the tissue. Another one is just putting a patch and putting some paste, and hopefully the person is going to survive, kind of repair. Okay, so here the body membranes. You're going to have here epithelial membrane that's going to cover your whole skin. Cutaneous membrane, okay, that should be first. Okay, going to have mucous membrane. So cutaneous, you know, is on the skin and is exposed to the air, so it's totally on the outside. You know, the skin, not much to, to think about that. Now, the mucous membranes, look where they are. You're going to find them in your respiratory system. You're going to find in your digestive system and reproductive system. Okay, so you have mucous membranes all over the internal part, covering the interface of your body to the outside environment. Okay, so you think about your lungs, you are inspiring the air, so that's your outside environment that is going into your body. So mucous membrane is covering the lungs. And then you think about your guts. Yeah, you eat some food that's technically outside of you, goes through the tube, so mucous membrane covering your tube, your guts. Okay. So here, 4 types of those membranes. Get to the other ones too. All right, so here, cutaneous, your skin, is made up of keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelial cells. What does that mean? Stratified means more than one layer. Keratinized, it means it has keratin. That's a fiber, that's a protein. Squamous, it means the top layer is made up of those flat cells, right? Squamous epithelium. So you have to give a full name to your skin. Okay, it is keratinized. Okay. So that is part of your epidermis. That's the outside part of your skin. Then under the epidermis, you're going to have the dermis. So the dermis is what is going to connect to your connective tissue. Okay, we're going to get there. Okay. What is the importance of cutaneous membranes. Well, basically, you want to protect whatever is inside of you, and you want to prevent water loss, and you want to keep boundaries, right? You don't want to, lose what's inside of your body. So you want to keep it intact, keep boundaries. Now, look at this. Unlike the other types of membranes, the skin is a dry membrane, meaning the outside is dry. I mean, I don't have to mention that, right? But what I have to mention is that the layer of cells that is on the outermost part of your skin is dead, okay? In order for your cells to be alive, they have to be in contact with fluid. Did I mention that before? Yes? No? Maybe? Okay, so when you look at the epidermis, the outside, the top layers, those are made of dead cells, right? Because in contact with the air. Now, if you look at membranes of your mucous membranes, like for example inside of your mouth, are those in contact with fluid? Yeah, you have saliva in your mouth, so those are alive, okay? So it's in contact with the air, that's not alive. If it's in contact with the fluid, those are alive, okay? Am I blowing up the time? No, I still have time. So yeah. Mucous membrane, we also call that mucosa, okay? So again, this is opening to the outside environment, opening to the outside, to the external environment. Where you're gonna find them, I just mentioned it. Important parts of mucous membrane. They not only have to protect the organ, they have to serve as an interface, and they have to serve as absorption sites. You have to absorb things through the membrane. Comparison to your skin, what are you going to absorb through the skin? You don't really have to worry much about that. But when you look at your lungs, you have to absorb the gases. You have to do gas exchange, right? So very important function is exchange of stuff, exchange of gases. When you look at your gut, you want to absorb the nutrients, right? Otherwise, what's the use for intestines, right? You need to absorb the nutrients from what you eat. So mucous membrane has a very important absorption component. Okay, what are the cells that are composing the mucous membrane? You have different types. You can have stratified squamous, but not keratinized. Or you can have simple columnar types of cells. So it depends on which part of your mucous membrane you're talking about. Okay. All right, so there you go to these serous membranes. So these are the ones that sometimes we have a bit of a hard time trying to understand what is this serous membrane. They are covering the organs, all of the organs, but they do not come in contact with the outside environment, okay? So when you look at serous membranes, they're going to be like sacs that are protecting the lungs. So each lung has its own serous membrane, and like a sac that is protecting the heart. And then this mush of folded sacs that is protecting all of the internal organs. So the serous membrane is really covering everything. And it has two parts. It has one part that is closest to the outside, not in contact with the organ. And it has another part that is in contact with the organ. So the part that is in contact with the organ, you call that visceral serosa. So this is a double membrane. The part that is in contact with the outside, you call that parietal serosa. So double membrane, one that is in contact with the organ, is actually covering the whole organ. You cannot just peel it off. It's part of the organ. So you call that visceral, and the one that is on the other side, you call that parietal. In between these two membranes, you have a little bit of fluid. That's why you call it serous membranes. That little bit of fluid is going to serve as cushion, and also to avoid friction. In case you can imagine, in case of the heart, you have the heart beating all the time. You don't want heat to be developing. You don't want a lot of friction to be going on. Okay? So parietal and visceral part. And of course, this is all internal. There is no contact with the outside. So everything is moist. So the cells are all alive. And Interestingly, this membrane is made up of a simple layer. Simple is only one layer of cells. So this layer of cells has to be quite protective and quite bound to each other, these cells, because it has all this covering function. But imagine it's one layer of cells, it's not a pack of stratified cells. Okay? All right, so this is your serous membrane. And then we get here to the synovial membrane. So these membranes you're going to find around joints, especially the big joints. So you can see, like, for example, on your knee, you're going to have this outer covering of the joint, and this is what you call your synovial membrane. It's going to hold synovial fluid. Okay, it's going to protect this whole casing outside of your synovial joint. Okay, it's showing over there. It's showing articular cartilage. Okay. Okay, so synovial fluid is going to be secreted by cells that are present in that areolar connective tissue. Okay. All right, so here we come to last two slides talking about inflammation and tissue regeneration. Okay, so mainly you have two types of tissue repair. One of them is complete regeneration. So you end up with a tissue that looks just like the one that got damaged. So in this case, you have replacement of the original cells, and you have functional cells that get in there and just repair whatever got damaged. You can see that mainly with muscles. You can see that with bone fractures, although you can get some scarring with bone fractures, right? But basically, you get the tissue regeneration. You can see that also in case of liver. Like sometimes, you can actually donate a part of your liver as a living donor, and then your liver is going to regenerate and work just like the original, right? So this is kind of regeneration. But then you have another kind of repair that is called fibrosis. This is when the tissue cannot totally repair itself, but instead you get a lot of deposit of fibers just to glue the tissue together so that you don't die. Okay, so this is when you get scarring of the tissue. So what happens here is that the tissue got so much destroyed that in order for for the tissue for the organ not to be totally lost, you have this, just let's glue and paste it together with fibers the best we can, so just save the person and the rest of the organ function, even if this one part is not going to work properly. Okay, so the original function of this scar tissue, the original function of the organ in that part, it is lost. Okay, so steps for tissue regeneration. First thing that happens is that you have to get inflammation. Okay, so during inflammation, the site is going to get a lot of these cytokines and other types of inflammatory proteins that are coming through the bloodstream, and they are mainly produced by the liver. Okay, liver produces those proteins, and what is going to happen is that the cells are going to get there, also cells of the immune system, like I mentioned before, and they're going to start to produce these pro-inflammatory proteins. A main one is this histamine, like I mentioned before. Okay, it comes through the blood and gets in there and starts this inflammatory reaction. Okay. After that, you're going to start to organize the blood supply and organize the tissue. Okay, so you're going to have some form of granulation, that is what it's called, some form of initial scarring, and either the tissue is completely going to regenerate, or you're going to get more and more scarring. Okay, and at the end, you're going to have either complete regeneration or fibrosis, that is this permanent scar that stays there, and the organ still can be saved. All right, so last thing that you have to know about inflammation, the cardinal signs of inflammation. You're going to have heat in the area, you're going to have redness in the area, and also swelling. Just think about, hammering your finger, you're nailing something, you hammer your finger. First thing you see, it hurts. Second thing, it gets swollen and it looks red, right? And here it's like swelling. I thought at first it would be like yelling, but yeah, it hurts. So I guess it goes with the swelling. All right. Other thing, yeah, is painful. I don't know why there is a screw going to the brain, but I would assume that they want to depict pain. All right, so the other sign that people usually forget is temporary loss of function. Okay, hopefully temporary. Usually you say about 4 cardinal signs, but then temporary loss of function. And yeah, you imagine if you have a finger that it has a lot of inflammation. Well, let's say you didn't hammer your finger, but let's say like, you go to the manicure and then some cuticle gets inflamed and then it really hurts, right? You tend not to use the finger. You go pick up the glass with something else, like, other fingers, and they tend to avoid using the part that has the inflammation. So temporary loss of function is also a cardinal sign for inflammation. Okay, and again, inflammation is necessary for beginning of healing and tissue repair. So that is the last slide that I have here.